So now we're going to move to yet another aspect of motor behavior, in this case motors at the molecular scale, and Krishanu Ray will tell us all about those.
Okay, thanks Upi for inviting me for this workshop, and especially to Sitabro for keeping up with my indiscretions. I thought the conference will start on 4th, so I landed up 3rd night. So Sitabro was very kind to host me. So what I'm going to tell you today is not so much as neurobiology in true sense. It should be called neurobiology. It's more of a molecular biology with cellular connotations towards it. It so happened that this problem is best addressed in neurons, which are the longest cells found in the body. So what I'm going to tell you is more about the molecular properties of a protein, what is called motor protein. And these proteins, literally like a locomotive, utilizes the chemical free energy by burning ATP to generate mechanical motion. And using this mechanical motion, it literally walks on a tight rope, stepping on filamentous proteins such as microtubule or actin filaments. In this case, it is microtubule, and takes a very precise 8 nanometer step on every beta tubulin subunit on a microtubule. And so what I'm going to tell you today is the properties of one particular type of motor protein, which we called kinesin 2, which is I'll tell you more in detail and introduce you the motor itself, and which is involved in very specific set of transports inside the cell. And so I will give you an overview of these transport processes, and I'll tell you, more in detail about one aspect of kinesin 2 mediated transport in the neuron today. What we use is a model organism to do this analysis, which is called fruit flies. It's a very nice, cute looking pet that we all have in the lab. And most of the approach I use are molecular biology and imaging. I don't have to introduce this to the audience. The only reason I put it up here is for you to remember one simple rule, which is that all the proteins that are needed to make the synapse functional, both mostly at the presynaptic terminal and not so much at the postsynaptic terminal, are made in this part of the neuron and taken all the way through the axon to the presynaptic compartment. And that makes it one of the longest logistics of transport inside the cell. In some of these axons, it can be several meters long. So the question that we wanted to ask is, how these material that are made in the cell body of the neuron finds its way to the presynaptic compartment, and how does the balance of this material at the presynaptic compartment are maintained. Why is it that if you run quite extensively, your synapses don't go dry? Somehow they keep resuscitated and keep going. So that is a question that excited me for a long period of time, and I really haven't got the answer to this question. But we have defined a system where we can now ask this question and try to find an answer. The axons are a variety. There are lots of different types of axons that are there in the body. The most prominent one, which is this squid giant axon, which is several millimeters wide and runs several centimeters along the body of the squid, which you can actually see. It's really visible axon. Whereas the others, like the sciatic nerve, which are inside it, are also quite big and runs several meters long. And the axonal transport deals with the phenomena that maintains the movement of both vesicular material as well as soluble proteins through this axon to the presynaptic compartment. Most of the axons doesn't carry ribosomes, so most of these are proteins that are transported through the axon by using these molecular motors. These are the two examples of vesicular transport and organelle transport in the axon taken from a Drosophila larva, which is at the first instar stage, where it has this nice pattern of sensory neurons and interneurons, which are at the, this is the larval brain. And what I'm showing you is a movie recorded from this part of the sensory neuron. This is the cell body over here. And the vesicles are marked with one of the presynaptic vesicle protein called synaptobrevin. And you can see there are lots of these movements that are going on over here, which are both bidirectional. This is mitochondria labeled with, again, fluorescent protein. And what again you can see is that there are both stationary and mobile organelles in the axon. And this little twitch tells you that when we recorded, this animal was alive and intact and trying to wriggle out of the trap that we set in. So the question is, why does these movements look so different, and is there any regulation in these in this movement pattern? It reminds me of the city traffic in a way. It's quite crowded, especially if you go to cities like Pune or Bombay. You'll see a lot of traffic jams once in a while. Then there are clear highways, some traffic will move through it, and so on. And apparently, like this chaotic traffic in Bombay and Pune and many other Indian cities, the traffic inside the neuron also has some kind of an order and organization. And it doesn't really fail, because if it fails, then I won't be standing here and talking about it towards you. The movements inside the axons generally happens in three gross rates. The rates which are sort of at this range, that is 20 to 400 millimeter per day, is considered to be the fast axonal transport, and the examples of which I just showed you. The other rates, which are much slower, considered to be the slow axonal transport, were traditionally thought to be a slow diffusive process, which has just last few years have been proved to be not slow diffusive process at all, which are actually mediated by the motor proteins with long pauses instead of the short pauses in case of the fast transport. So the motor transport, motor mediated vesicular transport was first discovered, or the clue came from this picture published long ago. And there people showed that the vesicles inside the axons are linked to the microtubule filaments through these bilobed structures, which were considered to be the motor proteins. And then later on it turned out that these, indeed when these proteins are purified, turned out that they indeed are mechanochemical ATPases, which has these head domains which bind to the microtubule filament. It has a stalk and a globular tail domain. And if you purify these motors and bind them to plastic beads and put them on cover slips, you can see that they, on microtubule on cover slips, these motors can pull these glass beads, artificial cargoes, in a very systematic fashion on the microtubule. So therefore, one can use a neuronal system which is kind of one-dimensional, because it has all the plus end of the axons, microtubules towards this side of the axon, and all the the plus ends on this side and the minus end towards this side of the axon. And the traffic moves either towards the synapse or back from the synapse. So one can take this system and ask, how does different cargoes are sorted over here, sent towards the presynaptic compartment, and then brought back to the cell body. The system we use is the cholinergic nervous system in Drosophila larva, and this is a layout of the cholinergic nervous system, where you can see this is the larval brain, which has the largest density of the cholinergic synapses. In fact, in Drosophila, all the cholinergic synapses are found in the central nervous system and none on the neuromuscular junction. And then it has the sensory neurons, which are also cholinergic. They send their input to the brain, and this is the pattern of different cholinergic neurons, and this is the axon that goes to the brain. If you open up a larval system and label presynaptic vesicle, in this case it's a RAF4 labeled vesicle, you can record movements in a very persistent way that these vesicles keep moving in these segmental nerve neurons. So these are essentially the sensory axons that are sending their cargoes towards the synapse. And these are sort of, this movement occurs at a rate of about 1 microns per second and has a persistence of run length of 1 micron on an average. This was one of the most unusual runs we recorded, which has about 7 microns run length, and it kept going. Our recording period was 10 seconds, and if we recorded longer, probably we have gotten this run even longer. So this is an indication that some of these vesicles can run really persistently for a long distance in the axon. The axonal apertures are quite narrow. So this is a cross section of the segmental nerve, and the movement that I showed you probably happens in one of the sensory neurons, which has about 200 to 300 nanometer aperture, and typically it contains about 10 microtubule filaments, and often the space is filled up with large organelles such as mitochondria, and therefore this vesicle that I showed you have to negotiate through this crowded space while moving in the neuronal aperture through the axon. Now, if there is a defect in the motor function or the motor protein that moves these vesicles in the axon, then that can lead to the defective transport or failure in the transport and accumulation of these cargoes in the axon. You can consider this some kind of a traffic jam in the axon, which is, you can see here, this is a normal cross section where the axons are fairly narrow, and when the traffic jam happens, this axon swells up. This kind of transport defect usually leads to the reduction in the synaptic activity because the synapses become smaller, and due to these it develops some sort of a posterior paralysis, and this larva generally walks tail up. Now, these kind of systems are now known to happen in human disorders also. There are several human disorders which are now linked to the dysfunction of motor protein at different levels, like the amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which is sort of now linked to the dynein heavy chain mutation. Then there are CMT type disorders which are linked to KIF1B, but I was told recently that this is not correct, but definitely the Huntington type disorders are now linked with the. So today I'll focus mostly on the one particular inherited disorders which attracted a lot of imaginations and interest, and that is the Alzheimer's disease. I'm not going to tell you anything about Alzheimer's disease today. What I'm going to tell you is this cholinergic hypothesis about Alzheimer's disease, where it is predicted that the defect in acetylcholine cholinergic synaptic activity could lead to the beta amyloid plaque formation, and that in turn can affect the reduction in the cholinergic activity of the brain. So I'll focus now on one particular component of this cholinergic synapse, which is cholinesterase transferase. And this is a very important enzyme which is needed to recycle choline into acetylcholine and keep the synapse going. It's a soluble protein which is shown to be transported in a slow diffusive manner in the axon. And this is the data which shows the rate at which the acetylcholinesterase activity grows over a period of time. in contrast, sorry, the cholinesterase transferase activity in contrast to the acetylcholinesterase activity. And most of these enzyme is located, as you can see over here, in the larval brain at the presynaptic boutons. Right here, the green is the cholinesterase transferase, and the red is the acetylcholinesterase. So it's a soluble protein present mostly in the synapse, but made in the cell body of the neurons, which are located quite far away. So typically, in this case, several microns away from the synapse. So how does this soluble protein reach the synapse? We initially showed that the mutation in kinesin 2, which is a heterotrimeric complex of two motor subunits and a non-motor accessory protein, which looks something like this, which has these two motor heads, a stalk and a globular tail domain. This is the cartoon that represents the kinesin 2, which we showed that the accessory protein binds to the stalk, and the motor has a flexible stalk domain which opens up at the N-terminal end, and it has a different implication in its mechanical activity. So what we then did was we wanted to understand how exactly kinesin 2 regulates CHA transport in the axon, and we used a photobleach recovery assay where we just bleach part of the synapse or the axon and look at the rate at which it recovers. And these neurons were genetically modified to express a GFP conjugated cholinesterase transferase, which again localizes to the presynaptic compartment. And this is an indication of how it happens. So if you bleach parts of the axon and let it recover, you will gradually see the fluorescence will recover in this axon, but it never reaches the initial state of fluorescence, because there is always some amount of the static fluorescence that accumulates. This is the rate at which the regular GFP, which is considered to be just diffusing in the axon, recovers. And if you sort of compare these two movies, you will immediately recognize that the recovery rates are much slower in case of GFP-CHA. We then found that the recovery rates of GFP-CHA is proportional to the recovery rates of the motor that is considered to transport this protein, and then showed that the motor indeed binds to this protein through one of its tail domains. And this is the final experimental data. What we did was we created two different animals, one expressing a kinesin 2 without one of these tails, and the other expressing a full-length motor with both tail intact. And we found that the animal which expresses a kinesin 2 motor without the tail cannot pull down the cholinesterase transferase, although the motor is intact, whereas if the tail is present, then it pulls down both the recombinant and the endogenous protein. And this is just a genetic rescue experiment to show that the tailless motor cannot rescue the recovery as much as the full-length motor, which is shown here. And this recovery rate is much smaller than the regular recovery of diffusive GFP. So this suggested that kinesin 2 directly interacts with cholinesterase transferase through one of its tail domains, and this interaction is critical for its movement in the axon. This was quite surprising because soluble proteins were shown to transport in aggregates in the axon, and these aggregates were shown to transiently form and were not shown to associate with any particular motor. So here we find that a very specific example of a soluble protein which directly binds to a motor protein, and then apparently it moves in the axon. When we made the chymographs of these recovery movies, we found that unlike the GFP, which has a bidirectional recovery pattern, which is typical of a diffusive recovery, the GFP-CHA recombinant protein has a unidirectional recovery, and this recovery is blocked in kinesin 2 mutant also, and it cannot be rescued by the tailless motor, but it can be fully rescued by the full-length motor protein. And this pattern is similar to the pattern of the motor itself, which shows this biased anterograde moving recovery pattern. But what was interesting in this kymograph is that we don't see any line or linear traces of the recovery, which Sandhya will show you tomorrow more in her talk, which is the typical of vesicular transport in the axon. What we see is a very gradual kind of recovery, which looks very similar to the recovery of the diffusive GFP. Now this is what people have shown earlier, where the soluble sorry, I think I forgot to link up the movie, it will not play. But you have to imagine that in case of the other known slow component transport, the cargoes which are transported in slow component, people have shown that these like neurofilaments form a filamentous structure, and this filamentous structure move persistently towards either anterograde or retrograde direction. Or in case of the other soluble proteins such as synapsin, synuclein and glucose synthase, they form these little aggregates which sort of slowly move along the axon. So therefore the cholinesterase transferase movement is quite distinct and different from the other soluble cargo that move in the axon. The question is, how does this movement gets regulated? What we found was that this movement is not constitutive. It happens only for a brief period during the larval lifespan, and the example is shown here that it picks up around the larval age of 78 hours, and then it comes back again within an hour. So there is a brief period in which the movement takes place, and otherwise it remains at the basal level. So in other words, kinesin 2 can only bind to cholinesterase transferase for 1 hour in these axons and transport them through these axons, and after that 1 hour period they somehow disengage with these cargo. Incidentally, when we looked at kinesin 2 motor alone, we found that the motor recovers consistently at all stages of the larval life. So that indicates that the motor keeps moving consistently, but the cargo can be only moved for 1 hour during this period. So it is quite perplexing for us at that point of time, which we have now analyzed further, and it turned out that there is a sort of global cue which is present all along the axon. In this case, the data that I showed you is only recorded in a 10 micron axon. We have subsequently done analysis in a 2 millimeter axon at different positions, and again we find the same phenomena, that all along the axon there is a global cue which triggers the motor cargo interaction, and then as if the entire bulk which is present in the entire axon starts moving together like a large big train towards the synapse, and then after that 1 hour period the whole train stops, and again the bulk remains. So this showed that the bulk soluble protein that are present in the axon doesn't have a particular start or stop kind of a movement. They present in the bulk, and the motor which is moving has a the periodic association and dissociation with this cargo, and that causes a sort of a period in which the whole bulk will move in the axon, and then a period when nothing will move at all. This kind of explains the bulk movement behavior of many other soluble cargoes that has been shown to move in a similar fashion in the axon, but we need to sort of analyze it even further and understand more in detail about the molecular biology of this cargo motor interaction to get a further clarity on this regulation of this process, and that's where the whole idea is rests right now. How much time do I have left? Okay, good. So then I'll now switch from this study to another study which is more biological, and in a way which will give you an idea about the consequence of this charge transport that I showed you just now. So when we looked at the axons in this mutant where the charge transport is defective, what we found was two kind of phenomena. One, that there were this large electron dense material which is accumulated in the axon, and it sort of delighted us. We thought that, okay, we got the phenomena which showed that there is a huge accumulation of soluble protein in the axon. That's how you could get this. But then we also found in some other axons these kind of small vesicular accumulates which were present in many of these mutant axons, and we were surprised to find this kind of a vesicle accumulating in the axon. These were very small vesicles which are not generally known to be present in the axons. These are really tiny, about 30 nanometer vesicles. So in order to find the reason behind these vesicle accumulations, we went back to the literature. We studied and we found that kinesins are known to associate with many different RABs, and these RABs are kind of a molecular switch which allows the motor to hook onto a vesicle and or get dissociated from the vesicle. And this switch works by hydrolyzing GTP. So if RAB is in the on state, it will allow the motor to bind the vesicle as compared to if it is in an off state, which will disengage the motor from the vesicle. And there was one RAB which was attracted our attention, and that was RAB4, which was shown to bind to KIF3B, which is one of the kinesin 2 motor homologs in mice and humans. And in our case, this will be called KLP64D in Drosophila. But how exactly it interacts was not very clear. But this interaction was shown to play a role in moving late endosomal vesicle in the cells after endocytosis. Incidentally, RAF4 is also a protein which is enriched at the presynaptic compartment and is transported in the axon from the cell body to the synapse. And therefore, we used a RAF4 MRFP conjugated fly which expresses RAF4, and this is a combination stock which shows both cholinesterase transferase and RAF4 localization in these cholinergic synaptic boutons. This is a normal axon where you see that the RAF4, the small RAF4 vesicles are present occasionally. This is a mutant axon where you see this large accumulation of the RAF4 vesicles. So you have to now, okay, so this is unpublished, give you a very tight correlation, but it suggests that the axonal transport and synaptogenesis are linked, and in this case at least the cholinesterase transferase and RAF4 mediated vesicular transport are engaged in synaptogenesis in the larval brain. We are still working on it to find a more tight correlation and understand exactly how the axonal transport and synaptogenesis are exactly correlated. We want this ideal data where we want to see pick one identified cholinergic neuron and show that the synaptogenesis the axonal transport precedes synaptogenesis. That involves both fluorescence live imaging, correlating it to the electron microscopy, and hopefully next time I'll be able to talk more in detail about that. So this is where I have to end my talk. So I'll just simply give you the take-home message at the end. Generally, intuitively, one thought that the intracellular transport by the motor proteins would have this kind of a three-step process where the motor will bind a cargo, and then it will run persistently for a distance, and then it will deliver the cargo. So far, what we have found out by looking at two different types of transport in the Drosophila neuron, it doesn't really support this intuitive hypothesis. There is no fixed pickup point in which the motor seems to bind the cargo, and there are no defined lengths of runs that the motor has to go through. It seems quite random that the motor, a cargo can move for a certain distance, and for different cargoes the distance they move are quite diverse. However, there seems to be a global regulation of this whole process where the cargo and motor interactions are globally regulated. What is it that regulates it that we still don't understand? It could be a synaptic activity, it could be the action potential, or a surge in calcium release in the axons. But this is something that we want to investigate more in detail in further. And interestingly, the cholinergic system is so well pharmacologically well studied that we will have lots of different pharmacological agents to play with to perturb the synaptic activity of this cholinergic system and study its correlation to the transport. So with this I stop here. These are some of the recent publications where we described most of this data. Some of it I did not talk today. I need to acknowledge the people who has been the most instrumental in getting all these results. The results I spoke today is mostly done by Aparna, who has just finished her PhD thesis, and the EMs were done by Seema in the lab, and the project is now carried on by Swagata and Anuttama, two of my PhD students. And these are the other students whose work I didn't get a chance to talk here today. I'll probably talk about in a more appropriate situation. So I just want to take 1 minute of your time to advertise this recent a school that we are going to organize shortly. So this will be more. So this school is going to be organized to explore the link between the axonal transport and the neurodegenerative disorder in 2 parts, 1 part in Bombay and 1 part in Mahabaleshwar. And fortunately, we got a very good set of speakers who are the most expert in the field to talk about this topic. The deadline, you will get more details if you go to this website. The deadline is now extended by 1 month. Instead of 19th November, we will accept applications till 19th December. So if any of you are interested to attend this school, please apply. It's open to everybody, both physicists and biologists, and we'll try to sort of accommodate as many applicants as possible. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Krishanu. And just to preempt any of the questions, I just wanted to say that actually to me this kind of molecular level work is very, very intimately linked with the systems level function and the behavior of cells, because of course all questions about homeostasis, the formation of the connections and so on, in the end they rely on this kind of transport and molecular movements and control to set them up.
Yeah. Now, one of the most interesting and exciting thing would be to study how the learning process, when you keep stimulating it regularly, affects the transport.
Absolutely, I'm going to catch you and some others later. But anyway, right now, questions please.
Thank you, sir, for a very enlightening lecture. I have a very basic doubt. We have a molecular movement in both the directions in the axon.
Yeah.
So how do the motor proteins, they regulate the bidirectional movements?
The motors are intrinsically designed to walk only in one direction. So there are either plus end directed motor or minus end directed motor. So these RABs, which are instrumental in regulating the flow, they can actually recruit a specific kind of motor. For instance, the RAB4, for instance, can recruit kinesin 2, and then once it recruits kinesin 2, since the axon has a uniform layout of the microtubule with the plus end towards the synapse and minus end towards the cell body, so therefore the motion will go towards the synapse. Whereas if some other RAB comes in, like RAB5 or RAB6, which will recruit dynein, then the flow will go backwards towards the cell body. So this is how one can control the direction of movement of this material in the cell. In addition, there are these kinases and phosphatases. So phosphorylation of certain kinesin, we still don't know about kinesin 2, but certain other kinesins can activate the motor function, and dephosphorylation can deactivate the motor function. And this is very well studied in case of chromosome segregation, where the Aurora B kinase can activate SNP motor, and the whole thing will move towards the center of the cell. And then a PP2 mediated phosphatase activity will dephosphorylate and inactivate the motor, and so that the chromosome doesn't go back, stays there. So yeah, so this is how the direction of the movement is regulated by intrinsically designing intrinsic design in the motor, which the motor is unable to walk other ways, and setting up the network, the railways, in a way.
So following up on that question, so the motors that carry information back towards the
cell body.
Cell body will have to be transported down.
Will have to be transported, exactly, it's a very good point. Yes, so it was shown that dynein, for instance, piggybacks on kinesin heavy chain. So kinesin 1 is transports dynein all the way from the cell body to the synapse. And while it is transported, the dynein remains inactive. So dynein has to be maintained in a constant inactive state while it is being transported. Yeah. We did not. We did a very limited FRAP analysis of GFP tubulin. Unfortunately, the tubulin subunit we used are not axonally enriched. So we need to find a proper axonal tubulin. This. Yeah, I have more data for the cilia in this tubulin. It's very slow. It's about 4 orders of magnitude slower than the CHA. So far, I don't know about any such. Who? Junk. Is there any such global regulation of junk? No. Anyway, we'll talk about it later.
Okay, then, if there are no more questions, I'd like to thank all the speakers for this morning's session, which has spanned a very, very wide range of topics. So thank you very much.